Hi everyone. I see we've got quite a few attendees already, so we're just going to make a start to our webinar. Welcome along to our first cereals webinar funded as part of the Farm Advisory Service. I'm Jennifer Struthers and I'll be your chairperson for the day. Have to admit it's a bit strange sitting here in my own house talking to myself, but I do see we've got a good 60 attendees on, so we'll just make a start. This event is part of a series of two webinars that we're holding this week. So today we'll focus on spring and winter barley. Normally we hold this event at our Lanarkshire trial site at Drumalbin farm by kind permission of John Bannatyne. Unfortunately, this new format means that none of you are going to get to sample the excellent tray bakes and cakes that are usually put on for us by the family. But hopefully you've all got a cup of tea and you're sitting ready to tune in. We're going to be going for about an hour today. We're going to have a mixture of live panelists and some video footage from our sites. Obviously this is a bit different for everybody, but we're going to try and make it as interactive as possible. So we'll have a few polls and questions and things as we go. So I'll just move on through the agenda and introduce some of our speakers. So we're joined live today by Neil Havis and Henry Creissen from our crops team. Neil's going to give a bit of background to the site, and Henry's going to talk a bit about IPM adoption on arable farms, as well as some of the work on the barley trials. And Neil will give us a bit more information on the fungicide efficacy in Ramularia too. We've also got some videos from people joining us virtually. So we've got Alistair Drysdale, who manages our sites, and Steve Hoad to talk about varieties. And right at the finish up, we've got Julian Bell from SRUC, who's going to give us a bit of a market update at the moment. Once we've done that, we're going to hopefully have a live panel question and answer session to bring it all together. So as some people may have been on a webinar before and be familiar with this, but I'll just go through the setup. So we'd really like you to ask questions throughout the presentation. You'll see down the right hand side there's a chat function, a questions function, so you can type a message to us in there. I think there's an option that you can either put it to everybody or just to the organisers. So if you just put it to the organisers, we can see the questions and we can pose them as we go. Just put the questions in at any point, and we can dip in and out, or we can save them for the end. So really good if we could get some questions going through the talks. Normally this is the point in the meeting when I'll do the housekeeping and tell you all the things that's going on. So I assume nobody's got a fire drill scheduled. If the fire alarm goes off, maybe you should just make your way outside. We'll not be offended. We'll have basis and NRoSo points available, and we'll tell you more about that in the end. These events are funded by Scottish Government with the Farm Advisory Service, so it's really important that we collect feedback from them. There will be the usual feedback forms. Normally we would hold you hostage until you've completed them, but we can't do that. So we're a big plea if you can complete the survey that you get sent an email following the event. It's really important for us. So one of the differences with this event compared to a normal event is we've obviously got people from all over the country, and I think we're up to 78 people joining us today, so it'd be really good to give us an idea and our speakers an idea of where you're all joining us from. And we've got a wee poll which should have popped up on your screen just now, so can everybody just take a wee few seconds and answer the questions on the poll at the moment, and we'll just get an idea of where you're joining us from today. So we've just got some results coming in now from the poll. So we've got about 47% of you are from the northeast and about 36 from the southeast and 15 from the southwest. So that's a very different audience considering we'd normally be holding this event in the southwest. But no, that's good for you to be able to join us. Think we've got another poll that should be queuing just now. So just to give us an idea of what you think is the biggest threat to barley production, your farm at the moment. So again, just if you could just quickly click on what you think the biggest threat is at the moment, and we'll get the results for them. So just as we're waiting for some results for poll 2, we've now been joined by Neil Havis from the comfort of his own home. So Neil is going to, in a minute, we've just got some poll results coming through, so I'll do them. But Neil's going to give us a bit of a background to the site at Drumalbin, because again, we're aware that people are from far and wide, so Neil's going to tell you a bit about sunny Lanarkshire in a minute. But we've got some poll results coming through. So 63% of you are the biggest threat is the markets, so that will be good. Julian will hopefully, I don't know if he'll make your fears any better or worse by the time he gets to his talk, but we'll cover that at the end. 19% disease, 13% climate change, and 5% weeds. So thanks for doing that. Gives us a good idea of what your fears are at the moment. So as I say, Neil's going to give us a bit of an insight into the background of the site at Drumalbin and some of the barley trial work done at SRUC, and then followed by a bit from Alistair Drysdale as well. So I'll just hand over to you, Neil, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. My name's Neil Havis. I'm a senior plant pathologist with SRUC. So I'm going to give you a bit of background to Drumalbin and some of the barley work we do at the college. So obviously Drumalbin is one of the trial sites that we use. We have a number across the whole of Scotland. So we try and encompass all of the different climatic regions that we have in the country. So Drumalbin would be more of our west, the furthest west of the trial sites that we have. We have more in the east, and also in the north. We have trial sites in the north as well. So that way we can cover all the different climates. It's a good challenge. It gives different disease pressures and different challenges for the barley plant in terms of growing conditions. So in terms of what we have at Drumalbin, so we've been at Drumalbin in 2007. The video you're going to see shortly from our trials manager, Alistair Drysdale, will show you the location of Drumalbin and a bit more about the kind of where it is in terms of elevation and the soil type. So I'll leave that to Alistair. But what we do have is a wide range of projects and trials at Drumalbin. As I said, we've been there since 2007, courtesy of John Bannatyne. It's a very good site in terms of a challenge to barley, because it presents disease conditions which are favorable for disease, probably more so than maybe many of the other sites. So it's a good balance and a good test for some of the new varieties and some of the new fungicides that come along. So we do national list trials. We do HDB recommended list trials. We've had them recommended list trials at Drumalbin for many years. We would have had a spring barley one this year, but unfortunately due to the COVID lockdown, we weren't able to sow it. We have fungicide performance trials, and you're going to hear more about that this morning. So the fact that Drumalbin is relatively cool and wet, it's ideal conditions for Rhynchosporium. So in terms of a good trial site for fungicide performance against Rhynchosporium, Drumalbin is probably our best site. We have inoculated trials, so we have winter barley and spring barley recommended lists, and then the trials are inoculated with a disease, and then we can see how the different varieties stand up to the disease in the challenging conditions. We do work for the Scottish Government, and you'll hear more about that this morning. So one of the big themes that we're investigating, of course, is integrated pest management, and you'll hear more from myself and more from Henry Creissen about what IPM means and what kind of trials we're carrying out at Drumalbin this year and the other trial sites to see how we can devise new disease control programs which tick the IPM box. We do commercial work. We do have commercial trials on the site as well for commercial clients. So it's very popular with clients as well because they recognize the value of the trial site. We do work for charity funded projects. So you'll hear more about some of the Mains of Lauriston projects this morning from myself and Henry. And Mains of Lauriston are particularly helpful in promoting and funding trials which are near market and very applied, so helps us give information that we can then pass on to you. Okay, so we're going to move on to a video from Alistair Drysdale showing you a bit more about Drumalbin and the kind of growing conditions we've had this year.
Welcome to SRUC's winter barley trial site here at Lanark. This site has been operated by SRUC courtesy of the Bannatyne family for the past 14 years. So we have built up a fair bit of experience with the fields on the farm and have worked round in rotation over that period. The trial site here is at 250 metres above sea level on a fairly exposed site, and is used as a test bed for particularly wet weather diseases, Vincosporium being one of the main ones. The trial site is roughly 2 hectares of winter barley trials, which are looking at fungicide performance, the use of variety mixtures in IPM systems. We have winter barley and winter wheat recommended list demonstration trials, and commercial trials, as well as inoculated trials on winter barley disease on recommended list varieties. The main challenges facing the growing of crops this season has really been the very wet autumn and winter. The crop was established here on the 3rd of October last year and established reasonably well. It was sown at a seed rate of 360 seeds per square metre and has established it in the region of 280 to 320 plants per square metre, with one of the main challenges being the very dry spring conditions. The site here has only had 8 millimetres of rain in April, which compares to a long-term average of approximately 45 millimetres, and in May it's had 28 millimetres of rainfall, which would again compare to a long-term average of round about 60 millimetres. So soil moisture has been a fairly critical factor here in the crops, which has made decisions on, for example, plant growth regulators fairly difficult to make because the crop was under significant moisture stress during April and May. Hence the crop is fairly short. We would hope though that if we get good grain fill, that will go some way to compensating for the reduced yield from the reduced tillering of the crop here. Because the soil is a fairly light, loamy soil, it doesn't hold significant amounts of moisture, and that has been one of the main challenges really this year. In terms of other management on the site, we applied an early post-emergence herbicide of pendimethalin and flufenicet, which has given good control of annual meadowgrass in particular, which can make harvesting crops in wetter areas of the country more difficult.
Hopefully that's given people a bit of an insight as to the site at Drumalbin and what we do. One of the main attractions to our trials evenings usually is the variety trials, and unfortunately Steve Hoad wasn't able to join us live today. But we have managed to condense it into a short video. We can't give you all the highlights, unfortunately, but we've got a short video on winter barley trials. And again, if there's any specific questions, please feel to put them in the box. We'll try between us to answer any questions about the varieties as best we can, but if there's anything that's specific for Steve, we can pass that along and we can include it in the recording of the webinar, or we can get back to you individually. So if anything about varieties, give us a wee shout. We'll also have the full recommended lists will be available on the FAS website following this as well. There's been no spring barley trials, unfortunately, sown on the sites this year because of the timing of the COVID restrictions and things with the staff. We weren't unable to do that. So we don't have any footage of that, but Neil's going to give us a wee update on the spring barley varieties as well. So barring any technical difficulties, we're hopefully just going to run into Steve Hoad's videos on winter barley varieties.
As part of our events this year, we also wanted to give some highlights on the winter barleys for this autumn. So I'm just going to give a top 6, what to look out for, what to think about for this year. So The top yielding variety at the moment is LG Mountain. So this variety is now in the 2nd year on the recommended list, and I think it's really now become very quickly one of our favourite choices. So it's very high yielding, fairly decent specific weight, and relatively early maturity. So that is something to take into account when making your choices. Of the established varieties, then KWS Orwell still has a place. Not quite as early as Mountain. It's reasonably good agronomics and a reasonably good treated yield as well. So Orwell, one of the more established varieties. If we're thinking what's coming through, then something also to look out for is KWS Hawking. So a stablemate of Orwell, very good specific weight and fairly good for straw stiffness as well. So again, that's something in the pipeline to look out for as a variety to accompaniment Mountain and the other top varieties. A variety that's on the 2nd year on the recommended list is Valerie. Although not as high yielding as Mountain and Orwell, Valerie brings with it some exceptional agronomic features in terms of quality and above average disease resistance. So for specific weights and for low levels of screenings, then I would say that Valerie would really be a top choice. Another variety that's got exceptionally good specific weight is LG Flynn. So that's another one of the fairly new 2 rows, but I think this variety provides a really good complement to the other leading 2 row varieties. When it comes to 6 rows, there's quite a number of hybrids to choose from. There's only one conventional 6 row, and that's Funky. But what I'm going to pick today is SY Barracuda. So this very high yielding hybrid, 107 treated yield, does very well both light and heavy soils. It brings with it a very good combination of yield and high specific weight. So that's really the top pick for a 6 row feed variety.
Okay, so just going to quickly run through some of the spring barley varieties for 2020, what's available. Obviously, the dominant variety we have is Laureate. It's 50% of the UK return and more than 60% in Scotland. We know it's got full approval for brewing and distilling. One of the things it does have against it, possibly it's slightly later maturing, but it does have good high resistance to mildew and it's moderate for Rhynchosporium. And in terms of yield, it does fairly well in the north, 104 as opposed to the average for the UK of 105. So Laureate's the dominant variety. If you're looking for a good multi-purpose variety, Sienna is still a good variety. We know it's still approved by for distilling. Again, it's slightly later maturing, but what it does have going for it, it's got very good specific weight. In contrast to the other spring barley varieties I'm going to talk about, its resistance to brackling is only moderate. So if you had an issue with brackling last year, or you think it could be an issue for you on your farm, think about that carefully if you're going to choose Sienna. And again, its disease resistance package is fairly good. Fairing's now considered a specialist variety. It's not the highest yielder. What it did have for it when it was introduced, it was very good in terms of Rhynchosporium resistance. The rating's now down to 6, where it was up before about 8, but in the field it still performs very well, so it could be actually better than a 6 in some cases. The advantage of fairing as well, it's early maturing, very low screenings, and again it's that disease resistance package. So that might be an option for you if you're considering something for going for grain distilling. Propino is still popular for feed. It does have approval for brewing. It's a slightly earlier variety as well, so that is probably something that growers might be looking for. The thing to bear in mind with Propino is it has no resistance to mildew and it's only moderate for Rhynchosporium and brown rust. So if you are thinking about growing Propino, you're going to have to grow, you're going to have to use a lot of mildewicides to keep that crop clean. Okay, so one of the newer varieties, RGT Planet, it's still a relatively high yielder. It does have approval for brewing, but again, what goes against Planet possibly is its specific weight. It's only intermediate. It's not as good as some of the other new varieties which have been brought in. So it's probably one of the reasons it hasn't been taken up as well as people hoped it would. But it does have good agronomic features, and it's fairly good in terms of disease resistance package. On to some of the new varieties which are just coming onto the list. We have Tungsten, it's a new addition, so it's provisionally approved for brewing and malt distilling. It does have the good agronomic features of high brackling resistance and a stiff straw. Again, Tungsten's slightly later maturing, and for screenings it's only intermediate. So good resistance to mildew, but the limited data we have shows it's fairly poor for Incusporium and brown rust. But again, it does have the potential for high yield. Another new addition is Splendor, which has potential for the brewing market. Again, slightly later maturing, does have good stiff straw and brackling resistance, but we're seeing the same picture here with Splendor as with the other new varieties. It's good resistance to mildew, but the other disease control spectrum is fairly poor, so not so good for Rhynchosporium and brown rust. And lastly, Firefox, another new addition. So it has potential for malt distilling. There's a similar specific weight to Laureate. From limited data, it looks to be a good stiff straw with high brackling resistance, an intermediate specific weight. The maturity, it's a bit earlier than Splendor and Tungsten. High resistance to mildew, but again, only moderate or poor disease resistance to Rhynchosporium and brown rust. And that's something which is in common for all of the new varieties. If we go back and look for the start of the list in terms of the potential loss between treated and untreated, so Laureate was a 7% reduction. By the time you get to some of these new varieties, you can be up to, for the likes of Splendor, 12% reduction. So that's something to bear in mind. If you're not going to use significant fungicide input to protect these crops, you may suffer from crop loss, excuse me. So that's the last slide. Thank you.
We've got a few questions coming in, but they're maybe more relevant to some of the stuff that's coming up later. So unless there's anything else, we'll just probably move on to our next presenter. So we've got Henry Creissen, another one of our SRUC crops team. Just before we cut to Henry, we're going to just run another wee poll. So we've got who makes the crop protection decisions on your farm. So again, if we can just jump in and answer those questions. Henry's going to talk a bit about IPM. He's got a video and he is joining us live. So if there's any specific questions for Henry, again, you can put it on through his video and ask him at the end, or if not, we can catch up with him in the panel session at the end. So 22% with an independent agronomist, 25% with a merchant agronomist, 13% farm manager, and a 40% with a combination. So quite an even split actually between everybody there. So that'll hopefully help Henry a bit with his questions too. So we're just going to run into a video from Henry. As I say, please keep putting questions in. We can save them for the end, or we can jump in with them when we can, but we want to answer as many as we can. So we'll just run Henry's video at the moment and we'll catch up with Henry after it.
Hello there, I'm Henry Creissen from Scotland's Rural College. I'm an applied plant pathologist, and today I'll be talking to you about integrated pest management as part of the Farm Advisory Service webinars on spring and winter cereals. Integrated pest management is really a holistic approach to managing harmful organisms. So that includes harmful fungi that cause disease and viruses, but also invertebrate pests such as slugs and aphids and weeds as well. And it's about managing these harmful organisms in a way that maximises profitability and minimises the impacts of production on environmental health. To try to quantify the levels of adoption we currently have in the UK, we conducted a farmer survey in 2017 in collaboration with colleagues at the University of Reading, AFBI in Northern Ireland and Chuggas in Ireland. There were 225 farmers surveyed, and we found actually that overall the Scottish and the English farmers were performing significantly better in terms of their levels of overall adoption. There are various different factors that relate to adoption. Farm area is one of those, so those of a larger farm area are likely to have higher levels of integrated pest management adoption. Also important for integrated pest management adoption was farmers' perceived familiarity with IPM. So information source is key to improving farmer familiarity and as a result adoption of integrated pest management practices. The survey data suggests that those higher adopters of integrated pest management value independent agronomists, open days and crop walks and discussion groups as their most preferred and valued information sources. So for that advice that they're receiving from their preferred information sources to be credible, it must be evidence-based, relevant and current, which is why we at SRUC conduct field trials looking at the different IPM components in different crops and how they interact, and we do this every year at various different sites up and down the country. Here I am at our Boghall site on the outskirts of Edinburgh. It's usually the first site that we sow and the first that we harvest. This year there's not a great deal of disease, as there isn't really anywhere, but we're still seeing differences between plots, and hopefully some of those differences will show up in the grain yield information as well. We've got various different integrated pest management trials on farm, and these range from looking at the integration of non-chemical control measures. So we've got a sowing date trial here where we have winter barley plots sown 3 weeks after their recommended sowing date, and we can actually see those plots. They're slower to develop at this time of year, but we also tend to see them being slightly less responsive to fungicides because they have less disease. So last year we found that in the early sown plots of the susceptible variety, which was KWS Tower, there was a significant response to fungicides in the order of 2 tonnes. This was largely due to high levels of infection of tan spot, but also ramularia, whereas the later sown plots, the response to fungicides, even in the susceptible, was much less, and because the crop was much cleaner, and those effects transferred over to grain yield. We've also got various different trials where we're looking at the interaction between varieties that differ in their susceptibility to key diseases such as Rincosporium, and how that affects their optimum fungicide dose. So we have trials where we keep the fungicide treatments the same. So it would be a Siltra-based program in the winter barley where we have either a no spray program, a 1 spray, which would be a T1, a 2 spray, T1, T2, and then a 3 spray program, which is T0, T1 and T2. And we've kept those treatments consistent across a few trials that are funded by the RESAS, the Scottish Government, and also the Mains and Lawston Trust. This allows us to compare the effects of fungicides and their interaction with variety between different sites and even between different trials where we might add in another component, such as the sowing date variation.
That's great. That's a bit of an update from Henry. This video was filmed a few weeks ago, just to check with Henry that there's nothing he wanted to add. One of the questions we have had in was about some of the work you were doing on mixtures. I think from previous years that wasn't really been covered in the video. So do you want to explain to the audience just a bit about that work you've been doing?
Sure. So
as we're looking at the effect of variety in controlling disease and hopefully working with fungicides to protect that yield, we've also started looking at mixtures of varieties. So these are typically 2 or 3 varieties in which you physically mix the seed before sowing. So you end up with a scattering of different varieties throughout the field. Those varieties can be selected based on disease resistance traits. So you can have some varieties that are perhaps more resistant to Rincosporium, where there's others perhaps more resistant to mildew or net blotch. And by combining them in the field, you can get all sorts of beneficial effects in terms of compensation. When some varieties perform poorly, others can perform well as a result of an increased amount of resources available to them, for example. The amount of characters within the field acts as a sort of buffer against environmental stresses, including diseases. So what we typically see is that over time and across space, the yields are high, perhaps not as high as the best performing monoculture under a high fungicide input program, but they're up there with the best and perhaps more stable across time and across space as well, which gives the farmer more confidence in predicting the sort of yields and the return they're going to get. The only problem some may have with mixtures is the issue with heterogeneity in the grain at the end. We are doing mixture trials in winter barley, so we're focusing it towards being a feed crop. So we're getting away some of those issues with consistency and quality that obviously the maltster would be particularly concerned about. What we're finding is actually in the last couple of years of these trials that have been done in Aberdeenshire and Lanarkshire is that actually the yields that we're getting from some of the mixtures are as good as the best performing monoculture, which in several sites has been funky, the 6-row conventional. And where the 2 other varieties that we have in different combinations are paired, the more susceptible variety, KWS Tower, is typically seeing slightly less levels of disease in the mixed plots than it would in the straights, the monoculture plots. So there looks to be some advantages there, and I think perhaps under high disease pressure, say you had a lot of Rincosporium coming in or something, you're more likely to realise the benefits of those mixed cultures. There's something we like to look at more, and our colleagues in the north are doing a fair bit looking at interspecific mixtures, so intercropping and that, which is sort of taking that diversity within field to the next level and looking at the benefits you can get from that.
Great, thanks very much, Henry. Obviously, as I said, Henry will be in the panel session at the end, so if there's anything about that or the video, please feel free to put some more questions into the chat. We're now going to go back to another short video, this time back to Neil Havis, who's going to cover a bit about fungicide efficacy and ramularia. Obviously, the disease pressure so far this year hasn't been very high with the dry weather, but the weather has definitely changed in the last few weeks or so. So be interesting. We'll get Neil's video and then a wee update from him as well.
So we're here at the Drumalbin field trial site to talk about some of the barley trials that we're carrying out this year. One of the things we've been looking at over the last number of years, of course, is the adoption and design of integrated pest management schemes for barley production. So that means we've been looking at things like elicitors and other biologicals as a seed treatment, and also how to incorporate them at possibly the T0 spray timing as well. And this all builds towards an IPM program where you cut down your reliance on fungicides and move to more holistic approach where you use many different aspects to control disease. The major disease we see here at Drumalbin, of course, it's one of our cooler, wetter sites, is Rincosporium. But we also see mildew, ramularia, and we've seen brown rust here in previous years as well. So the idea of the integrated pest management schemes, you use other aspects of disease control and you cut down the fungicide use. We're looking now at an elicitor as a seed treatment, one based on seaweed extract, and then at the moment this year we're looking at different products at the T0 timing, and then a reduced rate fungicide program, so where you're using almost a quarter dose of the full recommended dose. And what we've seen in previous years and what we hope to see again this year is that these new IPM programs can give us good disease control and the same good yield responses you'd see from a full fungicide programme. The other trial we would be having here at Drumalbin, as Alistair mentioned, is the Rhynchosporium fungicide performance trial. We know Rhynchosporium is probably the major yield robbing disease in barley crops in Scotland. Luckily, the azoles and the SDHI fungicides are still working quite well. There are some new products coming onto the market for disease control in barley, so they're evaluated here at a high pressure site. One of the other aspects or interesting things with Rhynchosporium control is that people have used strobilurin fungicides, and over the year we've seen a gradual decline in the efficacy of these products against the disease. So that's monitored here on an annual basis, and then we can pass on recommendations to farmers and growers later in the year so they can make appropriate decisions to control disease in future barley crops. The other major disease we'll be looking at here, of course, is Ramularia leaf spot. So there are a number of trials here, part of a European-wide trials programme to look at the efficacy of Ramularia control. Obviously in the past everybody's relied on Chlorothalonil, but from May the 20th, of course, Chlorothalonil was no longer approved for use in barley crops. So the trial here is to look to see which other products will give good efficacy against Ramularia. As I mentioned previously, there are a number of new products which have come on market, things like Revusol, and there's also a new QII fungicide from Corteva coming to the market as well. So we hope to derive information here that we can supply to growers so they can make the appropriate fungicide choice for next year.
It's a bit of a standing joke how much Neil always likes to slag off how much rain Lanark gets and how it's just...
Never, Jennifer. I love that site.
he loves the site. He loves the Ayrshire, so he surely gets more rain than Lanarkshire.
Probably, yeah.
But yeah, so Neil is very much the man on Ramularia. So we've had a few questions in about that. So obviously, to say that was filmed a few weeks ago. Things have changed weather-wise. So what is the kind of risk for Ramularia this season currently?
It's pretty low. I think at the moment this year we've barely seen, Henry's seen the occasional spot at Boghall, but I've seen nothing at Drumalbin. One of the conditions that Ramularia really likes, because the fungus grows inside the plant, it needs ideally some warm, wet conditions so it can grow and keep up with the plant. That dry spell we had will not have suited the fungus at all. So we may see some coming later on, but I don't think it's going to be a high pressure year. I certainly wouldn't expect it. So I mean, it's not the year, not the conditions we were telling everybody, okay, let's get worried, let's be worried. This is famous last words. And the spring barley crops, of course, look very clean. The winter barley at Lanark, funnily enough, as you see, the conditions have changed. So between filming that, the Rhynchosporium that was at the base of that crop is now moving fairly rapidly up the winter barley crops. So again, if you've decided to omit a late season timing, it may come back to haunt you a little bit if suffering from the wet conditions.
Right. Excellent. Thanks, Neil. I think we'll just move on. As I say, any more questions for Neil, we can cover them at the end. We've got Julian Bell up next, who's going to give us a bit of an update on the markets. So just to give us an idea of who's listening, again, we'd just like you to quickly do a wee poll and just tell us whether you're growing for malting, for feed, or for both. Julian always gets the good jobs of telling us the news about how much things are going to be worth or not worth in the after harvest. Usually takes into account the B word being Brexit and the new C word being COVID. So he's always got some challenges thrown his way. So we'll just see how these, give you a few more seconds on the poll, and that'll give Julian an idea of what our audience is up to. And then hopefully we'll pass on to Julian. So 46% malting, 23% feed, and 32% both. So again, from the local event in Lanark, we wouldn't get too many people attending in the field that were growing malt and barley. So it's good to see people from across the country. So we'll just hand over to Julian now to just give you an idea. And again, any questions, put them in the box and we can put them to Julian afterwards.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, everyone. Excuse me. So good to hear a bit more about the audience, and obviously a good many of you got malting barley, so I'll be looking at that. So obviously it's a strange time to sort of look at the markets, because we're just a few weeks or a month or so away from seeing what the harvest is actually going to be like. And of course, we've got the weather, as always, we've got the market. We're getting used to Brexit as being another factor. Of course, as Jennifer says, we've got COVID-19. So what I was going to look at is a little bit of the world market, and it's shaping up to be quite a big crop potentially. Look at what's happened to Europe and in the UK. We can't say the EU anymore because we're not in it. But so yeah, just an overview. So obviously looking at Europe, big world market, big crop potential in the world market. A good chunk of Europe's suffered quite a lot from the drought, and obviously the UK is one of the worst affected parts in Scotland, as you know. We'll look at the malting barley and the feed markets, and clearly they've been affected. Certainly distilleries being closed and brewing with pubs and things shut. Parts of the brewing sector have been hit quite hard. And I'll look at towards the end just at the tariffs. There's a bit of good news and a bit of not quite so good news. We've got some extra protection put back in place, but there are some chinks, particularly reduced protection for imports of maize. So have those slides moved on, Jennifer? COVID-19?
Yes, they have, Julian. Yep, that's fine.
That's great. Thank you. So obviously we're in many fields, we're trying to work out the impact of the virus. It's clear that it's affected production. Some of the quite few distilleries have been shut. Some have reopened, partly due to keeping the staff safe, as it were. But many have kept going, and bottling plants have reopened. Overall, there aren't any hard figures in terms of whiskey. It's likely that less malt has been used over the last few months. We just don't have figures to say, well, okay, what's going to happen over the next year, and I'll come on to that. Beer's certainly been affected as well, as you know, in terms of pubs being closed. If we look briefly at the prices, actually grain prices have shot up, particularly wheat, and even oilseed rape have picked up a bit recently. Barley has picked up a little over the last few months, but it's certainly languishing, 30 or more pounds below the wheat price in Scotland, and that reflects the fact that we're having to export barley, and I'll come on to that a bit later. Now, if we take a step back and look at the world market, this chart, the green bars denote production, and the orange ones denote demand, and the blue is stocks. Now, we had been, until a few months ago, it was sort of looking like 2020 might be quite similar to 2019, or maybe a slight fall in stocks. But as the season progressed, particularly America, they've had a good maize planting season, and a good area of maize has gone in. Well, there have been some weather issues, but essentially there's a much bigger area of maize gone into the US. So that 87 million ton increase in the world grain crop, 60 odd million tons of it is the US maize crop. So that's really the strongest factor in the world market that's keeping the world prices subdued. Because aside from that, actually use is pretty good, up 52 million tons. But the net effect, stocks starting to go back up again, and that's overall at the moment the sort of negative factor on the world market. Of course, these crops have got to grow and be harvested, so there's a significant time to go before that's realised. Now that's the world market. What about the EU and UK? So as you were, we had very dry conditions through a lot of April, May, well, completely dry, as it were, literally no rain for quite a few weeks. That affected a whole swathe of Northern Europe, particularly parts of Eastern Europe. So already there've been reductions in what we think the EU will produce in terms of wheat and barley. And of course, our own estimates I'll come on to shortly have been much reduced as well. One of our key export markets for feed barley is Spain, and they've had actually quite a lot of rain. So that is potentially one area that we may not be able to export quite so much barley to as we were used to. But one key thing that's happened is that, yes, the outlook for world feed prices is relatively weak at the moment if the big US crop comes in. So that bottom line on the chart shows the US maize price. So it's languishing around about £100 a tonne, whereas the European wheat prices have risen quite substantially. So you can see we're at a big premium to the US corn price. It's actually quite similar to what we had in 2018. So the world market might be relatively well supplied if these crops come through, but Europe itself is finding that it's got issues with the drought, and we may stay at a reasonable premium. Now, the issue for barley is it's possibly somewhere in between the two, because it is fighting to some extent for the same feed market for export. Now, as you know, the key issue in the UK, we put in much less winter crop, 600,000 hectares less. That was mainly wheat, of course, but there was less winter barley, and there was a lot less oilseed rape. And the conditions of those crops is very, very poor. Of many of the winter crops, I mean, patchy, some are okay, but generally there's a lot of concern about the yields. And if you put it all together, it seems unlikely that we'll exceed 10 million tons of a wheat harvest, which is pretty incredible. It's 16.5 last year. So that it's the biggest crop. It's used for feed, so is barley, so that they do interact. So the UK as a whole is going to have really quite a big shortfall in grain. So that kind of underpins the feed market to varying degrees, which I'll explain a bit later. And I won't dwell on the wheat, but if you look at the spring barley, so we had this big increase in spring barley from extra sowings and over 300,000 hectares, obviously most of it in England. But the condition of that crop's not particularly good. You can see it's much poorer than last year. So the yield potential may not be great. Regionally, these figures are from the AHDB website, so you can go and have a look. Generally, most areas are not particularly good. This is obviously a few weeks behind, but Scotland, a good chunk of the crop is only in fair or poor condition. So what will the yield of the crops be? What will the quality? And if we look at the balance sheet for barley, we've got 2019-20, there's a yellow column with over 8 million ton crop, very good yields. If you look at really probably quite poor yields for both winter and spring, potentially we could actually have less despite that big increase in the spring area. So it seems likely we may not necessarily have any more barley despite that bigger sown area, but it would still leave us with a surplus. A couple of unknowns on this chart would be animal feed. We could potentially feed more barley, so that may well go up, especially with a shortage of wheat. And as you know, with the dairy and beef sectors suffering from the early spring, the drought earlier in the year, forage supplies won't be so good, and that can actually, it really supports barley use. So feed barley should well benefit, and of course straw as well, from the issues with the lack of forage. But still, we may have a reasonable amount to export, 1.8 million tons, which we have managed pretty well this year with it. It's kept barley at a discount, but it has been feasible. Now, moving more closely to Scotland, we actually have a very small increase in spring barley, just 7,000 hectare increase there. So spring barley is relatively similar, a bit less winter barley. Now on malting, what we don't know is obviously what's happened to distilling demand, exactly how it's going to work. We've clearly lost some demand into distilling, and will that affect the amount of barley that the maltsters buy? Now, I don't know for certain, obviously, but speaking sort of around the trade and things, there's no indication at the moment that they will necessarily need to buy less barley for Scotland. There are some concerns about movement and storage. Apparently most maltsters should still be logistically able to take the barley, of course. And what's worth bearing in mind that we actually import 200,000 tons of malt from England. So the chances are that we may actually keep malting barley here in Scotland, and even if the actual demand for whisky is a bit less, it may actually allow the local production to continue. And of course, it depends on our yields as well here. And when we talk about the price, the English or the malting barley price and premium in Europe is relatively weak at the moment because we've lost demand into brewing. Last year in Scotland, distilling barley was trading at the same price as brewing barley. These are the differences between England and Scotland. So the red price, so last year our malting barley was similar price to England. It's still possible that we end up with a bigger premium over England and a lot of the barley in England won't be suitable for distilling. But obviously it's hard to tell because we're not quite sure where demand's going to end up. But the dry spring and the lack of rain, it is tending to potentially push up grain nitrogen levels in barley. So it will not necessarily be that easy to find low nitrogen barley elsewhere outside of Scotland. And it may be quite hard to find it here as well. So in terms of distilling, the weather may actually support the local distilling premium. Just quickly on forage and straw. Straw prices obviously shot up in 2018 with the dry harvest or dry conditions. We may be something similar this year for barley. Prices are edgy up at the moment, and I know that people are trying to secure, or livestock farmers, barley for the harvest. And again, feed demand could be strong as well. So last point just on tariffs. With Brexit, we're still waiting to see if we'll get a deal with the EU. But one thing that has been made a bit clear is that originally the government took away the tariffs for grain so that grain could be brought in at zero tariffs. But that left them nothing to negotiate with. So they've kind of put them back. And the main thing, they've just turned them into pounds. So for most grain, it's quite similar to the protection that we have in the EU. The one area that's a bit of protection has been reduced is on maize. So there's a zero tariff now set on maize imports, whereas within the EU, there's still around a €10 tariff on the maize. So that is a kind of weak spot, obviously, in terms of feed. And I suspect that we'll see more maize imports from whether it's the EU or other parts of the world. So really just to summarize, yeah, it's hard to just know where all the implications of COVID are going to take us. We have lost some demand, of course, from beer and whiskey sales. But how quickly that recovers is quite a big question. In the world market, the main negativity is actually really coming from one crop, US maize. So the fortunes of that crop will have a huge impact on pricing. In Europe, we're actually in a wee bit better in terms of prices because we've got obviously drier conditions here. Clearly, in terms of income on the farm, this isn't good because we won't have the yield, but that is tending to support our own prices to varying extents. In terms of whiskey, yeah, it's, again, we haven't got firm figures, but clearly with the yields being that bit potentially lower given the conditions, it may be that although whiskey, some demand has been lost in terms of whiskey, the use of local barley may actually remain relatively unchanged because we do import malt, so that might be the area where there is a reduction. And of course, Brexit is still a guessing game, but at least there is some good protection potentially there for sort of wheat and barley. But in terms of the feed market, we may actually find that we're going to get more imports of maize, and the protection's been removed there. So a bit of a mixed picture there, but I hope that gives you an update of some of the main issues in the market at the moment. Thank you.
That's great, Julian, sorry. As usual, it's a bit of a guessing game and I don't envy your job at all. If you had a crystal ball, it might be a lot easier, unfortunately. So we're just going to now bring in the rest of the panel. So we've got Henry and Neil joining us again, and we've had some questions coming through. We can still take a few more. We're just slightly conscious of time because we don't want to hold everybody back. But if there's any questions after this or anything that you think about, feel free to email us and we can put it to the panel and add it into the recording. So one of the questions we had, and I think it might be best placed to Neil, but you can tell me otherwise. So one of the problems, obviously, there was various issues with establishment and things this year, but somebody who's got a field of late sown spring barley, which is Hacker, and it's growth stage 32 just now. It's very low for wrinkle, and they're just thinking, when would you spray it? What would be the risks, and when would you go?
So generally with Rhynchosporium, you want to try and control it as soon as possible. So most of the research that we've done shows that the more Rhynchosporium you have around the stem extension stage, the more impact it has on the yield. So really, if the wrinkle is there, you want to try and get something on to control that as soon as possible. It's not a case. I don't think it's going to be a high ramularia year, so I wouldn't think about leaving your spray and then just hoping to hit ramularia and wrinkle with the same spray. You really want to get that wrinkle controlled, so go on as soon as you can. That would be my advice. Henry's nodding, that's good.
Excellent, we've got agreement. So hopefully that answers that question. Another question we've got, which this is maybe a bit mean to both of you because it's probably a question for Andy Evans, but unfortunately he's not here. So somebody has had an issue with a BYDV and their laureate spring barley, and it was just to see if there was any comments of what you're seeing on trial sites and things with the BYDV this year. Don't
Henry,
all
do you want
rush
to
at
comment
once
on
to
bog
answer.
call?
I've not seen much about, to be honest. I don't know how isolated that incident is. I don't know if anyone else has seen much about, but I've not seen a lot about this year. I think there could have been a lot more problems from what Andy was saying, but the weather sort of stopped aphid populations really getting to that critical mass and getting on the wing and starting to fly around and infect crops. With regards to laureate, I don't know of any work done in barley that has found significant differences between varieties in terms of their resistance or tolerance to BYDV, but I'm aware of a winter wheat variety that I think is coming out not this autumn but next autumn, which is apparently resistant to BYDV. But I don't know if there's anything else you might want to add to that, Neil.
I haven't seen much. Well, I've only been to the Drumalbin site mostly, so I haven't seen much in terms of BYDV. The big issue I have seen, and it was kind of touched on in some of the talks, is the winter barley, that dry spell, and then the nitrogen went on, and then when we did get some rain, the nitrogen was taken up and a lot more secondary tillers were produced. So when you look through a lot of winter barley crops, there are a lot of dead secondary tillers which have been aborted by the plant. So you see lots of yellow and rotten tillers, but there's also very unevenness in the crop this year. So that's going to be an issue for farmers come harvest time, how you deal with that uneven crop development in senescence. So it could be a roundup job.
A roundup job later on. Another one for you, Neil, probably on ramularia. So I can always, Fiona Burnett always says barley takes all sorts of spots. So
yes.
how would you identify that it was definitely ramularia that was in your crop, as opposed to something else?
You're looking for the 5 R's as used to distinguish ramularia from anything else. You're looking at the top of the canopy, really, primarily, but you're looking for a rectangular spot, a reddish brown coloration, a ring of chlorosis around it. You're looking to be right through the leaf, so if you turn the leaf over, it looks the same on the other side, and that differentiates it quite quickly from other diseases as well. It's basically that if you goes with those guidelines, you pretty much won't confuse it with anything else. The only other rectangular thing which you can confuse it with is net blotch, and we don't get a lot of net blotch in Scotland. But the net blotch will extend and rectangular up the leaf, whereas the ramularia stays in a more square spot.
Yeah, as I said, we've not had a lot of net blotch this year, but I think it was last year one of our sites had quite a lot of net blotch, and particularly in Tower. So I don't know if that resistance rating is likely to drop or something. It doesn't seem to be doing as well against net blotch as it has done
previously.
Yeah.
Great. Another question we've had through, obviously the loss of chlorothalonil this year has been a big blow, but has there been any trial work at any of the sites on alternatives to that just now? What kind of work's going on?
Yeah, so that's what we're looking at this year. We had trials last year as well, looking at alternative chemistry, looking at some of the older fungicide products, looking at some of the new biostimulants and other additives you can put in. We know that Revusol, the new azole from BASF, is very active against ramularia. So that did well in trials last year. It's not up to the level of chlorothalonil, but it's the best that we've got. But of course, if you're growing for malting, you had to have that on before growth stage 45. So that's an issue. So we'll wait for new chemistry to see what can be done. It looks like there's some activity being regained, strangely, by prothioconazole. So Proline might be an option as well. I don't think it's going to be a high ramularia year, and if you've missed the deadline for Revusol, then Proline's your option this year, and then next year we'll see what the new chemistry can do. Henry, anything to say on that?
No, and we are doing trials where we're looking at alternatives to fungicides as well. So lots of wonderful muck and magic and various combinations with synthetic fungicides as well. So these are trials that we have in Scotland, but also our colleagues in Ireland have replicated trials, and they've actually got quite a decent amount of ramularia this year. So even though that's why we'd link up with them, because it wasn't really a problem for them until a few years ago. It was only started presenting a real threat to the barley crop in Ireland.
Yep, that's the advantage of good links with people in Ireland, but also people in Europe as well. That European trial, you can share results and share findings as well. You're not relying on one country to produce data.
I think we've got kind of one more question, probably specific for Henry, about your mixtures trials, and that's what's the sort of levels of the mixtures? Is it half and half, or what percentage of each variety? And what varieties have you been trialing? Is that part of it, or is it specific varieties you're using?
Yeah, so there's lots of things you can do with the mixtures. You can play around with numbers of varieties and proportions of varieties, but you can get to quite large trials if you start exploring all of them at the same time. So with the mixtures, I've got 2-row mixtures, so it'll be two 2-row varieties. I've got, which will be KWS Tower, and this year it was SY Venture. And I picked those because of their disease resistance traits, but also I can visually identify them in the field based on the pigmentation of the awns and the lemma on the grain. So I can look at the disease levels on individual varieties within the mixture plot. The 6-row is funky, it's conventional, so that's why I picked that, so that you can home save the seed, and whereas obviously it wouldn't be an option for a hybrid barley. Yeah, so in the 2-row and in the 2-way mixture, so 2 varieties per mixture, it's 50-50 basically based on seed numbers, and the same in the 3-way mixture as well. It's equal proportions every time, because it gets quite confusing if you do everything at the same time, as I said.
It's good, excellent. So we've had the good number of questions there. So conscious of time. If there's anybody that feels their question hasn't been answered, or they want to ask an additional question, feel free to get in touch after this, and we will add it into the recording, or we'll get back in touch directly. So we're just going to have a wee quick roundup now. Hopefully my screen will move across. So thanks very much for coming along. We've had great attendance, and hopefully everybody's got something out of this today. It's been a bit different doing a crops day with no crops really, but it's been dry inside, so that's been good. Quick reminder, as I said, basis NRoSo points. If you can email your name, your number and your postcode to Heather Hasson in the Lanark office, she'll collate them and apply for them. So that's heather.hasson@sac.co.uk. I'll leave this slide up. Massive plea for feedback forms. It's usually what we do at the end of a normal meeting, so this feels quite normal, but you'll get a link, and it's a SurveyMonkey link. There may be a prize draw, so don't miss out on the opportunity. I can't say much more than that just now, but don't miss out on the opportunity. If you could get the feedback form to us, that would be brilliant. And as I say, this has all been recorded, so you will receive notification when the recording is available, and it may have different questions and things added on to the end of it. Any materials and things we've mentioned today, such as the recommended list, there's a whole host of other crop materials, soils, different materials available on the FAS website. If you have not been on there before, it's fas.scot. And as I say, there's loads of things on there, and there'll be more things go up. Obviously, this is the second webinar in this series, so we've got another one at Thursday at 10 o'clock, and that's going to focus more on wheat. It'd be great if you could come along to that as well, as there's more basis and NRoSo points on offer for that, and we've got slightly different speakers, so Fiona Burnett and Andy Evans. So if there's anything, any questions you want to put to them, and I'm sure the people who are on live would be happy to answer some Barley questions as well if you feel we've not covered anything today. One of the final questions we did get asked, and I was leaving it till the very end, so was about when the results from this year's trials will be available. So we're hoping to have another webinar after harvest, where we will cover the results, the trial results from the barley and the wheat trials, as well as there's normally winter roadshows in about January time. Obviously things are all up in the air. It might be that we can actually all be in a room together by January.
Virtual, yes.
But it might not, it might be still virtually, but hopefully you have enjoyed it, and as I say, you've managed to do it with the comfort of your own home, and we've had people from all over Scotland, which has been really good. You've missed out on your cup of tea and your burger, but hopefully you've still gained a lot. And at this point, I'd normally say thank you all for coming and safe journey home, but I think you're already there, so